Lovely. Okay, everybody, and welcome to Difficult Dialogues, which is a strand from our Childhood and Society SIG group. So just to go through some housekeeping with us all, it is recorded today. So if you prefer not to have your camera on or your name showing, please do make those changes before we get going. We're going to hear Professor Jane Osgood sharing her expertise and research with us today. And there'll be time for question and answers through the chat as we go along, but also at the end, we'll hopefully have time for networking, discussion, and sharing ideas. Always remembering to respect each other's space and contributions so that it's a safe place for us to create ideas and see what happens. So Professor Jane Osgood here from Middlesex University is going to share with you today her exploration of a playful archive on childhood research, adventures requiring care and recklessness. So I'll hand you over to Jane, who will introduce herself and then continue with her presentation. So thank you everybody who's joined us today.
Thanks so much, Angela. I will just share my screen because then that's that little bit of anxiety out of the way. Let's just check everybody can see. Are we all good? Okay, so yeah, thank you for that introduction, Angela. And as Angela has said, I'm based at Middlesex University, and over the past decade or so, I've been working with post-humanist approach, post-foundational approaches, post-qualitative approaches, feminist new materialist approaches. And it's quite a new and sometimes vulnerable way to undertake research, because you kind of displace some of the certainties of more recognizable approaches to childhood research. So that's what I really want to share with you is kind of this journey that I've been on and how it alters how research is undertaken and what it does to ethics, what it does to what we mean by knowledge and how knowledge gets produced and what counts as valid knowledge, to borrow from Patty Lather. And the other thing that I think is quite exciting about it is this is my most current piece of research. This is literally about to go into the world as a published chapter in a book by Lisa Mazai and Alicia Jackson, and the title of the book is Post-Foundational Approaches to Inquiry. And it's an edited collection, and there's an amazing bunch of people who are offering their thoughts on how you go about undertaking post-foundational approaches. And I suppose a brief word about post-foundational research is that it's philosophically informed inquiry, and the kind of thing that it's very, very diverse in the forms and shapes that it takes. But what does unite it is this kind of beginning elsewhere and thinking otherwise and constantly being in the middle. So Mazai and Jackson are interested in this particular book in how scholars use theories, concepts and materials to open up that which they cannot think without, and to map what emerges in a threshold with theory to create new connectives. And such contingent analytic frames can only be produced in an ontology that offers an undoing, to borrow from Judith Butler, an undoing of universals, displacing many of the normalizing features of humanist inquiries, that with which we're probably more familiar, particularly in childhood studies where the child is central. So in response to the invitation from Lisa and Alicia, rather than produce a standalone piece, I was moved to look back over the past decade or so and to offer what I've termed a playful archive, which threads a path through my research in childhood studies that insists that uncertainty, speculation, and curiosity displace more recognizable conventions that rest upon a search for knowability, linearity, and solutions. So it's a very different way to undertake research in childhood studies. So the playful archive, as I've termed it, weaves the promise of post-foundational inquiry through a series of provocations and propositions. And it's through partial glimpses through images, poetry, and accounts of speculative research practices that I'm seeking to gesture towards the potential that doing research differently can make in the pursuit of making a difference in the world. Hence, research is understood as affective, unruly, and ultimately activist in the difference that it makes in the world and how it comes about in the act and how it lingers and haunts long after. And I work with a range of feminist theories and philosophies, but I'm most heavily indebted to Donna Haraway and her invitations to serious play, go visiting, and to engage in practices of worlding as a means to reorientate both thought and practice. So the chapter contests that complexifying what research is, how it's done, and what it generates involves bringing matter, affect, philosophy, ethics, and theory together to push aside taken for granted practices and pursue research in a different key altogether. So there's been a steady growth in childhood studies framed by post-foundational philosophies and practices that takes up the invitation to go off the beaten path, to engage in practices of deep hanging out, where the researcher becomes infected and affected by that which she researches. This mode of researching makes demands that cannot be predicted in advance of going into the field, and in fact calls into question what constitutes the field. Post-foundational childhood studies insist that uncertainty, speculation, and curiosity displace conventions that rest upon a search for knowability, linearity, and solutions.
I thought it's already scored. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Somebody's got their mic on, I think. So Maggie McClure views post-foundational approaches as adventures requiring care and recklessness, and this is something that I've taken up in the Playful Archive writ large, but also in this chapter. And I attempt such an adventure by weaving emergent theory into practice methodologies that de-center the human by attuning to affective forces, taking matter seriously and exploring the potential for transdisciplinary approaches to generate different knowledge differently. So it's in this spirit of care and recklessness that Haraway's SF philosophy is variously enacted to take up worlding practices which generate myriad, unanticipated, embodied, affective, and sensory encounters through the everyday ebb and flow of life, and that continue to resurface long after research has happened. And as Haraway states here, what she calls worlding is knowledge making and world making that inform a craft that is relentlessly replete with organic and inorganic critters and stories in their thick material and narrative tissues. And this is the thing that I find particularly inspiring, is this tight coupling of writing and research. They're never separate, where both terms require the factual, the fictional, and the fabulated storytelling, where both terms are materialized in fiction and scholarship. So what research is and how it's undertaken is radically reconfigured, and as such freed from temporal and disciplinary boundaries. My chapter returns in the sense of aerating, turning over, composting, to borrow from Haraway, immersive encounters, atmospheres, hauntings, and memories, which intensify ontological insecurities when old certainties associated with research are displaced. So I kind of get started in the chapter with this poetic middling about the qualia of post-qualitative inquiry, wondering with a childing curiosity about the arts of noticing, attuning, sensing, slowing down, to ask, what else? What if? What emerges from deep hanging out, from being open to surprise? Tap into your inner child. Allow yourself to feel, taste, smell, hear, touch the world as it becomes through everyday happenings. Composing, composting, returning, aerating, dwelling in a slowed down state of discovery. Making, crafting, scrabbling, storying, other ways to think, feel, do research. So what research is, the reasons it's undertaken, and the potential it has to make a worldly difference are called into sharp focus in post-foundational approaches. Research can no longer be thought of as time-bound, place-specific, or indeed outcome-oriented. Instead, it must be thought of as ongoing, tentacular, affective, and affecting. McClure writes of the need for immanence, the imperative to get caught up with the movements and processes in which we are entangled in the moment. As she states, the middle can be a depthless and directionless non-place where subjects and objects no longer behave themselves to take up the places allotted to them by the rules of theory, methodology, or institutional discourses. Post-qualitative research then cuts across education, justice, environmental concerns, and attends to the urgencies of the Anthropocene, that is climate change, political violence, technological threats. Jasmine Ulmer encourages the privileging of creative experimentation over the delivery of definitive answers. Post-foundational inquiry effectively recasts how and why research is done. The objective is to produce different knowledges and outcomes in ways that understand agency to be a material entanglement. Post-foundational research has real consequences both in the moment and long after, and it holds the promise of actively reshaping the world by taking up creative possibilities to intervene. This is a fundamental shift that actively displaces the God trick identified by Haraway, the idea that we can be impartial, objective, at a distance, a dispassionate man of science, and instead celebrates partial perspectives, situated knowledges, and deep political commitments. The figure of the mutated modest witness, as Haraway has written about and I've picked up in some of my writing. Furthermore, this foundational shift insists that ethics are done differently, more confederately, more post-humanly. The philosophical underpinnings of post-qualitative inquiry insist that ethical commitments reach beyond a narrow moral responsibility for other humans to a relational ongoing responsibility in each moment to the something's happening, to borrow from Kathleen Stewart. This involves attuning to atmospheres and to what research agitates and what the affective forces set in motion generate elsewhere. Haraway argues responding to life on a damaged planet involves making trouble, getting in the thick of things, acknowledging that we are part of and contributing to the world's differential becoming through processes of symbiosis or becoming with. Haraway considers care vital to this troublemaking mode of research, which she defines in terms of curiosity. Caring means becoming subject to the unsettling obligation of curiosity, which requires knowing more at the end of the day than at the beginning. So it's the idea that we go into the field, whatever the field has become, with a sense of not knowing and being open to surprises. Ethically, this manifests as ongoing processes of curious care and capacities to respond. Undoubtedly, research practices shaped by flattened ontologies that make space for the non and more than human creative experimentation, recasted ways of knowing and doing, and a heightened, deepened sense of ethical responsibility founded upon curious care might seem alien and misaligned with old orthodoxies and institutional expectations about how to do childhood research. Research then is no longer in search of answers to predefined questions. Rather, as Manning asserts, what emerges from a study will never be an answer. What emerges will be patient experimentation. What emerges will be another mode of encounter, another problem, another opening into the political site as yet undefined. So the significance of qualia, the feltness in post-qualitative inquiry, is experienced through dwelling upon and amongst the materiality of research, the porosity of boundaries, the hauntings and bodily registers that are triggered from research that privileges affective attunement to what is unfolding, and the pursuit of these unfurling tentacles. Worlding privileges optics reliant upon what is sensed, what is felt, what is tuned into. Despite nearly 2 decades of post-foundational inquiry across education studies, there remains hesitancy, distrust, and frequent conservatism from key gatekeepers to research shaped by these considerations. This testifies to the highly effective, subversive, disruptive work that post-foundational inquiry undertakes. It makes people twitch. But it also ensures that more conservative, recognisable and knowable forms of research persist as authoritative knowledge. So post-foundational research often remains on the margins, but that can be a blessing and a problem and a challenge. So whilst increasingly present in specialist journals, conferences and networks, there are countless examples where post-qualitative inquiry is denied space, ridiculed or shut down altogether. This landscape creates conditions of impossibility for the post-qualitative researcher that must be navigated because it has profound implications for the shape research takes and the extent to which it is permitted to articulate its underlying philosophical tenets. This is perhaps precisely the reason we need adventures shaped by both care and recklessness, that is ethical and radically curious. As a community, post-foundational researchers are compelled to continue to take risks, to defy convention, and to strive for research that is deeply and unapologetically political, research that is activist. So these challenges and tensions are encountered daily and come with a loss of ontological security when we refuse to allow ourselves to be carried to a place of safety by dogmatic thinking or comforts of methodology. That's a quote from McClure. The remainder of this presentation and the chapter itself offer glimpses into methodologies without methodology. That's Kura Lundberg. That emerge from an ongoing commitment to research that disrupts taken for granted ideas about how knowledge gets produced. So, as I've argued previously, childhood studies framed by post-foundational philosophy involves emergent methodologies that align closely with childing ways of being in the world, that privilege open-ended exploration through bodily, haptic, sensory encounters with the world as it unfolds through the everyday and often unremarkable. As adult researchers, this demands that notions of anthropocentric expertise are given over to a willingness to and indeed relearn how to be in the world. Aesthetic explorations with cork provide one example of post-foundational childhood research. Myself and a former PhD student, Nina Odegaard, returned, aerated and sat with the hauntings that a pedagogical encounter with cork in a Norwegian kindergarten agitated. In our commitment to pursue methodologies without methodology, we sat with what unfolded and tuned into the surprises that reside in apparently not very much at all. Taking cork to the heart of our inquiry, we allowed our optics to wander and attended to the relationalities between cork and child in a worldly confederate sense. So we took our cue from a Norwegian preschooler's curiosity with cork, its feltness that incited exploration with teeth, nails, force, velocity. And we attempted to attune to child incapacities to notice, recognizing bodily explorations as astute observations of Manning's what else. And this involved pursuing tentacular lines of inquiry that reached far beyond normative explanations and resisted reinscribing narratives of biophilia, that is, innocence, nature, and purity, and how that conflates with childhood. Rather, we arrived at granular stories of the feral effects of the temporal and colonial displacement of matter, stories simultaneously disruptive and generative, to borrow from Anna Zing and colleagues. So, with curiosities provoked, a methodology without methodology emerged that invited us to explore what else cork might potentiate. And it was attuning to feltness, embodied encounters, oral investigations, and a willingness to be open to what the texture, scent, taste of the corks might agitate when we began to serious play. It was by foraging through our own houses, through kitchen drawers and in the depths of craft boxes that piles of cork stoppers were assembled, rolling cork between fingers, resting it palm up as it captured the sun, biting down on its spongy surface, inhaling the acrid scent of old wine traces, throwing it against the wall to watch it bounce haphazardly across the room, studying printed words etched along the sides, taking our cue for aesthetic explorations of natural materials from young children set in motion a raft of uncomfortable affects. So aside from wondering what cork is and what cork does, we were prompted to explore what and where else cork can take posthumanist inquiries into childhoods of the Anthropocene. And this insisted upon a project of tracing and delving into long-buried colonial, heteropatriarchal capitalist histories where the non-innocence of cork became apparent and where the figure of the child surfaced in surprising, troubling, and sometimes harrowing ways. Attuning to the unfurling of cork lines and staying with the discomfort of sticky knots generated other ways to encounter child, which we unravelled by delving into unlikely archives, unfamiliar journals, and from disciplines completely outside our own, confronted with formulas and equations about the science of cork that we would never have entertained had we abided by the disciplinary regimes that so powerfully determine how childhood studies should be undertaken. So venturing off the beaten path in pursuit of other stories about childhood via cork is fraught with vulnerability, risk, and a sense of fraudulence. We were in places we didn't belong. And this is precisely the sort of adventuring care and recklessness that is necessary if we're to take seriously children's place in the world and our human responsibilities to exercise an ethic of care to the world as endlessly past, present, future. Again, Haraway. So Kura Lundberg characterises such approaches, as I say, methodologies without methodology, because researchers are simultaneously working within and against existing methodological structures, ideas, and established literature. She goes on to argue that methodologies without methodology might be thought of as productive failures, shaped by a commitment to reinvent and re-envision methodologies as they come into being. So not following a formula, but seeing what emerges in the moment. Research then becomes much more creative and improvisational, replete with surprises, confusion, disorientation, discomfort, and sometimes even fun. Such research must tread a careful balance between conforming to recognisable tropes, whilst allowing itself to be open to the unexpected, but never in search of knowable and readily codified accounts of childhood. Kura Lundberg stresses that methods become temporary structures that melt, transform, circumvent, infiltrate, disappear, while opening new directions in inquiry. So childing engagements with the world offer a starting place from which to circumvent and infiltrate normative ways to undertake research. So another example was the curation of an arts-based workshop with glitter. So whilst not knowing, that is being open to the knotty, not yet known, is useful, the post-foundational researcher nevertheless comes to research laden with ideas, with theories, with philosophies, with politics, with passion. Putting theory to work through methodologies, as proposed by Jackson and Mazai, is a productive and political move. It's never apolitical. But it enables research to move away from technicist, formulaic, linear, and causal logic, and so challenge narrow ways in which to view and make sense of the world. So it's thinking with theory at all stages of the research that post-foundational inquiry pursues validity of other kinds. The integration of creative and artistic experimentation into research practices, alongside a deep investment in theory, results in a heightened comfort with the inevitable uncertainty that comes with partially finished thought and practice. So entering the field unsure of what all takes shape, being open to what hails our attention and thinking with theory is messy work that requires heightened ethical responsibility through careful research practices. So we, that is myself and Becky Coleman, curated an arts-based workshop that invited curious and speculative engagement with glitter. At each stage of the process, theory was put to work to consider the care and ethics involved in preparing and dismantling a post-foundational workshop involving glitter. A series of questions, reflections, and diffractions were agitated concerning what might unfold, what did unfold, and the effective and embodied traces that were left behind. So it was taking glitter seriously through arts-based practice involved dwelling upon the design, the choreography, and the management of a workshop committed to serious play. Taking matter seriously involved playful experimentation with what glitter is, what it does, and what we then do with what glitter does, as an ethical, careful, political, feminist experiment in thinking, feeling, doing deeply that was reliant upon childing sensibilities encountered in previous research undertaken with child researchers, in this case, my 3-year-old daughter and her glittery t-shirt, which hailed her attention. This image in itself signals that glitter holds capacities to hail attention, to demand a critical engagement, to slow down, to notice, to attune, and be open to what it can do. So taking our cue from this childing inquisitiveness, we sat with the trouble that glitter agitates and attended to further questions it provokes as it deepens our worlding sensibilities. Taking seriously the endless everyday entanglements with glitter involves attending to its feral effects as they emerge. Feral effects is a concept and practice offered by Anna Zing and colleagues, and they underline the fact that feral effects manifest in processes of manufacturing, consumption, and dispersion through multiple ecosystems that potentiate glitter as a teller of rich, colonial, gendered, sometimes deadly, always worldly stories that allow the promise of post-foundational research to surface. The workshop generated an atmosphere of discomfort and uncertainty. An effective ecology emerged from the material discursive capacities of glitter. We were cognizant of glitter as matter frequently viewed with disdain and held accountable as a significant microplastic polluter. During the workshop, we categorized glitter as either natural, new, or recycled and arranged it accordingly on these 3 tables. The natural biodegradable mica glitter was arranged with other natural materials, including leaves, shells, stones, and string. The new brightly coloured plastic glitter was provided with glue, scissors, and a free newspaper from the Murdoch Empire. Meanwhile, the recycled glitter came from my home, my daughter's craft box, and included glitter glue, glitter nail varnish, half pots full of glitter, and was arranged with other materials, including pipe cleaners, sequins, and a left-wing newspaper. Now, the tensions, complexities, and uncertainties of playing with glitter as a methodology without methodology raised important questions about the imperative to be attentive to what gets generated when research is undertaken in novel ways. Participants were asked to gravitate towards the table that appealed to the most, given minimal instruction, and advised that they would move on to the next table and then the next table, and each time leaving their creations behind. So as you can imagine, lively discussions unfurled, connections were made to the surfacing of glitter in everyday lives. Attention was turned to what it means, what it does, where it goes, what it agitates, and to our human responsibilities in the myriad glitter ecologies within which we are implicated. The glitter was undertaking significant material discursive work. Unsettling and generative residues of the glitter took on a dynamism that could not be predicted in advance, raising deeply troubling political questions that continue to live on long after the glitter was vacuumed and the artwork stowed away. So elevating glitter as central to educational research is not without risks. Glitter is dismissed as frivolous, irrelevant, a pollutant, with little to offer educational research. As an adventure in care and recklessness, this glitter workshop agitated a deep engagement with the consequences of human exceptionalism. Acknowledging that glitter traverses disciplinary boundaries allowed us to wrestle with pressing questions concerning the urgencies of the Anthropocene, from complexities of microplastic pollution to LGBT+ glitter bomb activism, the sparkleification of contemporary girlhood, to child labour and lung disease caused by mica mines in India. So the glimpses into research from a playful archive scattered throughout this presentation allude to a speculative not knowing that rests upon an underlying conviction to the feltness of research. Taking seriously Haraway's notion of research as visiting shifts the shape that inquiries take. Knowledge is generated from a position of being open to surprises. It's by tuning to atmospheres, halting moments, sensations, and uncomfortable affects that it becomes possible to exercise what Anna Zing terms radical curiosity, to find wonder in the everyday, a cork stopper, glitter, the unremarkable and the mundane. So in a recent publication from Multi-Species Tangles and Anthropocene Models, What Can Lichen Teach Us About Precarity and Indeterminacy in Early Childhood, I recount the potential for visiting in childhood research to tune into the unremarkable, in this case, a lichen, a dead pigeon, virus, chewing gum, to open up other ways to encounter the world and tell stories about childhood. So early childhood contexts are typically viewed as not very remarkable, shaped by routines and habits and structures, all intended to promote linear development through knowable progress. Post-foundational research, on the other hand, troubles this construction by taking inspiration from childing ways of being in the world, reconfiguring the everyday and unremarkable that's routinely found in contemporary childhood, such as glitter, wooden blocks, backpacks, animal figurines, picture books, playgrounds, outdoor spaces, dress up, the possibilities are endless, involves attending to the non-innocence of material discursive assemblages that work to generate and sediment ideas and practices. Being active in world-making practices involves bodily engagement and curious, philosophically informed exploration and open-ended experimentation with all the senses, as the examples with cork and glitter I hope have gone some way to illustrate. So the concern becomes with the feltness of the world, where encountering the more than is an ecology of practices that embodies transversality that generates more than one creation. As such, research finds expression beyond textual accounts of what was found, what was represented, what it means in terms of knowledge about the child. So McClure's depthless middle is worth remembering. All elements of research are entangled and coalesce in unexpected ways. Projects have multiple beginnings where planning and doing become inseparable, and allowing ourselves to get lost in the depthless middle is central to post-foundational research. It's in the depthless middle that hauntings are reawakened and unlikely sensed relationalities bubble up to guide research investigations back to places already visited and often adventures devoid of cartographic lines. The undoing of normative ideas and practices of qualitative inquiry is deeply unnerving and as such incites extensive critique on the grounds that anything goes. With the displacement of old methodological orthodoxies comes the assumption that research concerned with affect and materiality and shaped by creative experimentation is necessarily less trustworthy. But I hope what I'm illustrating here is that the demands felt by researchers undertaking research that generates, interacts and grapples with effective forces, in fact, demands a heightened accountability for how all aspects of research matter. Adventures in care and recklessness might find expression in published manuscripts, such as the chapter that this presentation is based on. How research is presented in published outputs is a further important consideration for the post-foundational researcher. So just going back a moment to Haraway's insistence on this tight coupling of writing and research, where both terms require factual, fictional, and fabulated, where both terms are materialized in fiction and scholarship. I think that's a really timely reminder that ideas about linearity, segmentation, truth, validity in research are in fact fictions. Recognizing and working with the tight coupling of writing and research makes the curation and crafting of manuscripts intricate, demanding, joyful acts of relational, collaborative, tentacular storytelling. I'm going to round off with a final example, which was the development of a scrabbling down the back of the chair methodology. And this provides an example of this tight coupling of writing and research. So this was an emergence of a methodology without methodology, which makes explicit the messy affordances of co-researching with a child researcher. In the pursuit of generating knowledge about childhood literacy in novel ways, the approach consciously defies convention to create space for heightened ethics. So this was a piece that was written by Victoria de Rijker, myself, and child researcher Laura Rosa. And in this research, we take up the figure of the bag lady as proposed by Haraway via Ursula Le Guin. We do this in order to develop what emerged as a scrabbling methodology, literally scrabbling down the back of our chairs. We were guided by a children's picture book, The Intensities of Living Through Lockdown Living and Homeschooling, and what was literally found on the back of our chairs. So the research refused planning, deliberation, precise control, or orchestration. It was very playful, and it was conceptually and practically oriented to undoing anthropocentric intentionality of research. And it was through scrabbling together with a child researcher and a host of non and more than human others that an in-between processual and indeterminate activity allowed for unforeseen assemblages to emerge through unexpected human, non-human choreography. So the glimpses at post-foundational research I presented are illustrative of the emergent nature of creative methodologies without method. Research intended to generate affect poses an ethical responsibility and highlights the need for a radical reappraisal of normative approaches to research ethics in educational research. Post-foundational approaches refuse to fit narrow humanist compliance to merely do no harm to human participants. The confederate, worldly, relational nature of post-humanist research instead insists that ethics must be understood both more broadly and more precisely as an ongoing, moment-by-moment responsibility. Haraway stresses the imperative to exercise the ability to respond ethically with curiosity and care to relational becomings as they unfold. This is not something that can be readily conveyed to university ethics committees or funding bodies, but it's widely understood within post-foundational research communities. Across the growing field of post-foundational research debates about ethical responsibilities, these have been widely rehearsed. The pursuit of creative experimental research, by definition, resists the pursuit of predictable and knowable formulas. The increasing influence and inflection of arts-based approaches to educational research contributes to ensuring that the field remains lively and dynamic, that knowledge through research creation is endlessly uncertain, generative, and inconclusive. It is committed to persistently opening inquiries to the emergence of an ongoing curiosity, which is not about discovery or getting things right, but finding ways to reach, for research to realise its political potential to disrupt, to upturn, and to actively make a difference in how worlds are made. And the researcher is implicated in that world-making practice. So the curation of adventures in care and recklessness traced through this presentation and within the chapter attest to how research mutates as it becomes intimately attuned to everyday rhythms, atmospheres, unfoldings, and in the pursuit of making a tangible difference. So there are many references in the chapter, and they are all here, and they're too small for you to read, but we can share this presentation after the seminar. So that's me done.
Wow, Jane, I think that's us all done. That's amazing. Very provocative, and so many realms and provocations presented and threaded and tentacled together that we've kind of that you've been researching over the years, but lots of different guests have been kind of pulling on as well. It was so fertile, so thank you so much. Again, I have loads of questions, and as a chair I'm going to just sit back and please invite our delegates who would like to liaise with Jane or to share their reflections or provocations. That would be great. So I can see anybody who's got their hands up would like to come in. While you're contemplating then, I love the ending bit, Jane, with the mutating research. I think that's a really powerful metaphor to close up with, because, you know, and I thought mutating ethics as well, as and I know Diane was looking at a couple of weeks ago at how, or she's kind of wrote about it, what needs to change, you know, ethically, these dominant ideas of what is ethical to be with children, and who is telling us, and what actually is the reason for the ethics. You know, so many provocations there, and then becoming in the world, and the curiosity of care and radical curiosity is so exciting. But Teresa, your hand is up, so it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts to Jane.
Hi. Yeah, one thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about is you say you gave a reference to some writing you did with Victoria de Ruycker and Laura Rosa, and she's a child researcher. So I'd really like to hear about that, because I mean, with the ideas about, flattened ontologies and, really wanting to upturn conventions, etc. I'd like to also know how the ethics committee responded to that. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, Laura Rosa has researched with Victoria previously, but this particular piece was in the depths of lockdown, and Victoria and I were kind of so the chapter itself is in a book, an edited book after the child, kind of inspired by Peter Craftle, or in response to Peter Craftle. And then the piece came about and we were like, oh God, how difficult is it to do research when we're all locked in our own houses? It makes that kind of human to human contact impossible. But then, when thinking through posthumanism and with posthumanism and calling into question what counts as the field, what counts as research, kind of gives you much more creative possibilities, I think. And the forces of the pandemic were also generative in some senses, not only a negative and suffocating force that meant we couldn't do research. It meant that we had to think more creatively about what research is and how we might do it. So Laura Rosa is a neighbour of Victoria de Ruycker, and they live on this sort of floating village in Dutch barges. And as I say, Victoria has this long-standing relationship with Laura Rosa. And Laura Rosa is a child who has some negative experiences with literacy and being measured. And so this was an opportunity to think about childhood literacy and children's literacy in a way that was more about matter and affect and relationalities. So we took the book as matter. That was our starting place. And then, so scrabbling down the back of the chair, that became the initial inspiration. And then we kind of followed Laura Rosa's cue, but then we also found what we found down the back of the chair. So it became, and it is very much this methodology without methodology. What was emerging in each moment then took us to the next place, to the next place, to the next place. And Laura Rosa was very keen to, to kind of document this through drawing and lists and cartoons. And so it kind of had a never endingness to it. And it really did mean that we, as the adult researchers, were not dictating how this came about, where it was going. And one of the things we have sat with is the kind of, ultimately it's become a published output. Laura Rosa is co-author, but all of that is still very contested space about how children are positioned and whether, what does being an author on an academic piece mean for Laura Rosa? It means different things for her than for us. So it's still not without its unresolved complexities, but as a research into children's literacy, where the child is co-researcher, it felt much more of a kind of flattened ontology, a flattened ontological process and project, where actually the head lice were also very very active in the research, and the hair and the coins and the dirt and the apple pip and all. So it became it was a huge amount of fun, but it was also deeply serious and deeply political, and told us all sorts of things about children's literacy that we would not have unearthed had we not gone scrabbling down the back of our chairs, both literally and metaphorically. So, but you can't put that in a research textbook and say, oh, here's a scrabbling methodology, stages 1, 2, 3, and here are the ethics involved. That's the point of it, isn't it? But you do research in children's literacy, so I don't know how. And similarly, yours is about the mattering of. So I don't know if that even answers your question, or just.
No, I suppose it's also that question about dealing with ethics committees who also have a different view about what counts as knowledge and what counts as research and what is ethical, because sometimes to us they seem less ethical. I mean, you know, like their rules exclude. So like children who want their names on things because,
yes, absolutely,
you know, they're not, why is it anonymous, or,
yeah,
you know, so those kinds of
and that's the ongoing negotiation, isn't it? But I think, you know, the point that you're raising about how do we manage ethics committees, funding bodies, that sort of stuff, it seems to me that there's a double move that we have to do, which doubles our workload of like being able to sneak in and go, yes, this looks quite conventional, and then creating space for this creative stuff, but knowing that post-humanist ethics means that what we're doing is even more ethical and rigorous, because it goes beyond just Laura Rosa and the preservation of doing no harm to her, but actually thinking about, you know, the pandemic, about head lice, about book publications, about capitalism, and so it kind of goes to all of those places in a deeply ethical way, which, you know, a kind of tick box for ethics clearance stops there, and it's a technical exercise largely. But yeah, we kind of have to do this dance of here's the ethics form, and I have tried to push back against it and put like this big long discursive account about Berard's ethics and and the ethics committee, like that doesn't fit in the form, what's that doing? So I think you have to get yourselves on the ethics committee and kind of try to push back against it or through it, around it, in whatever way, in all those multiple ways.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. And on that point as well, I mean, you know, what is ethics for? Who is it for? Is it actually ethically for children? I know those of us working with and for children, you know, do that and engage with ethics because that's what we see it for. But there's so many habitual and dominant aspects of ethics. I think that's arising here.
Absolutely, and I think that's the point that Teresa was making. It's like we work on assumptions about what's in the ethical interests of a child without actually really thinking about that ethics could be much more complex than that. And then, so yeah, the naming or pseudonaming of children is a really good case in point. And Laura Rosa, that is her name. We don't use her surname, but she wanted her real name, you know, but even that is, you know, it's fraught with kind of unresolvable tensions and difficulties about who we are as the adult researcher and who these ethics committees are and what they're protecting for whom and in the name of what. So yeah, it's endlessly problematic and needs to constantly be kind of pushed against, I think.
Thank you, Jane and Teresa. I can see Feng Ling now has her hand up, so we'd like to invite Feng Ling into the arena. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, for such thought-provoking presentation. So much to take in. Since the January, the European Congress for Qualitative Research, Congress in there, I went to your presentations and also in my thinking around those very creative research methodologies and ontology for us to engage with research started from maybe 2018. The gender and education in Portsmouth University, I think you were there as well. So that's my starting point. Now I'm still, on the learning journey with you and some other, scholars. And I think, it's a great way to engage me to really reconfigure where I am. And I think, still a long way to go. But I mainly say, thank you for sharing your most recent work with us here and to direct me with more theoretical lenses and also methodological, frameworks. And I might come back to you when I need, for the help along that way. And in relation to the ethics, I'm kind of thinking whether we need a particular, committee for post-foundational, research to enable this wonderful research to actually get the funding and get the momentum going. Yeah, thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting. There is a growing community and body of literature and I see many of the faces here of people who are contributing to that in important ways. And yeah, so it feels like, you know, it still feels quite marginal. And I think as I was trying to kind of articulate that the marginality means that this work is subversive and it's doing what we want it to do, which is to kind of unsettle, ruffle, and find yeah, kind of creative ways not to fall into traps of going in search of what we think we know already, and being open for knowledge to be produced in ways that keep things on the move, because they are on the move. So yeah, absolutely, Fengling. I can send you the references to that were on the final slide, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if anybody else has any reflections or questions, please let me know. And again, just thinking of Fengling and Jane's points while we're waiting, if anybody else wants to come in. There are a lot of gatekeepers, I've found, when you go to conferences or you're sharing your research that you've undertaken with children, like as co-participants or as leading researchers. And you do get a lot of gatekeepers sometimes when change is coming through that challenge your ethical the ethicalness of what you've done. So for instance, I know a project that I was working on, I was asking children to share their memories, and I know that when we shared the results from the Child Up and the Sham project, for instance, we got some peer reviewing saying, well, you know, is this safe for children to share their memories? And I think there needs to be a fine balance, that children have the choice and they know what they want to share, and it opens up a real Pandora's box about, do we trust children in a particular environment to want to talk about something and share something, or to look at something, or to research or lead, or, you know, do we have to keep having gatekeepers at such a high level that, you know, what does that stop? So when you talk about the not having the methodology and just, you know, going down the armchair following the children, you know, there's a lot of gatekeeping that prevents that sometimes. Jane, I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose central to post-humanist childhood studies is this kind of commitment to decentering the child. So it's not about making an individual child and their very personal story the kind of basis of your research, so much as what gets produced through these encounters and moments. So in a sense, you know, the kind of the mode of inquiry becomes much more confederate and dispersed and worldly. So it's not, it really does sort of knock off balance that idea of the individualized narrative as somehow representational, or providing some kind of, you know, kind of avenue into understanding child, but rather the so for example the child with the cork, you know, that kind of took us off on an adventure of how cork is so implicated in so many childhoods in a global way, but it was never about that individual child who took the cork off and us trying to understand why was that child interested in that cork in that way. It became a much more, as I say, these kind of following tentacles and having a, so that's what I was trying to say when it's, you know, it's kind of, it's both broader and more specific. And that taking kind of material, these encounters, these moments of encounter, rather than some kind of complete narrative about an individual child that can tell us something about childhood. The kind of the starting place, that it's McClure's depthless middle. You know, it's kind of, you're not, it's not, yeah, it's not, it's just a completely different project, I think. It's a very different approach to childhood studies, and therefore it requires a different set of ethics, a different, you know, post-humanist ethics that is about these encounters within the moment, and what they produce and what we do with what they produce, and the ethical response, the ability to respond ethically in each moment. And that, you know, you could not put in an ethics form, an ethics protocol, because you don't know what you're going to encounter until you're in the moment of encounter, that then becomes another moment of encounter and another moment of encounter. So the apparatus is not fit for post-humanist childhood studies, I don't think.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, and again, I think sometimes as well on the ethics, the safeguarding aspect can take over and it loses purpose. But I know that's a whole different subject there. Thank you. I know Diane had some thoughts. I don't know if you want to come on, Diane, to share with Jane your points.
Hi. No, I just liked, as I've written in the chat, love the idea of just following the flow and being fluid and flexible. But the majority of time in ethics in universities, it's not about doing that. It's about not doing the unexpected, and therefore you feel as though a lot of the time you are restricted and you can't actually do what the child wants to do, because it's got to be around what the adults who are deemed important want to do or feel the child needs to do. But I just liked the thinking around the willingness to let go and the agentic entanglements of curiosity and the patient experimentation, and also sort of what you just said then in terms of the ethical encounters in the moment and how do you write that on an ethics form. You can't, but I just thought it was very interesting and thought-provoking. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it does feel, I mean, I don't know if other people feel it, but, you know, I think people were nodding when I said it feels like a double move we have to do of you know, giving the pretense that it's a very conventional project and then creating space and opportunity for these things to unfold and to kind of set aside a sense of yourself as expert. And I've shared this many times, but that opening slide where I'm taking a photo inside a box, the thing that held my attention was this smear of snot. And you know, how do you put that in an ethics form? I didn't know I was going to find it, but it took me to places and I just became completely transfixed. And you know, I got a poke on the shoulder by one of the practitioners. Are you sure you're expert in childhood? Like, what is this research that you're doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just interested in the snot. Well, that's but the children are here. This is what you should be focusing on. But it's not to say that I wasn't interested and tuning into what was going on in early childhood. But it doesn't have to be about what is that child, what does it mean, that the snot is as significant in that context as anything else. So you can feel it does make you very vulnerable as a researcher, and to try to explain it to people is actually really very difficult. But if you can take them along, that's where things get really fun. And children are much more willing to be taken along, like Laura Rosa and other children, you know, in these settings because actually it is embracing their childing sensibilities, seeing child as a verb. Kennedy and Cohen have written about this, Walter Cohen, around childing as a verb, as a doing, not the ultimate preserve of young children. It's not only children who can child. So if we can bring that into our research, is this kind of verb of childing and tuning into the world and being affected in the way that children are, like with the cork and glitter. My daughter standing there for hours, abandoned her supper, completely transfixed by what glitter could do. Then it makes our avenues into research much less predictable, but also really uncertain and slightly unsettling, but much more fun, I can guarantee.
It's also sort of like challenges the linear sort of way that early childhood is assessed through learning outcomes. You know, when you think of Loris Malaguzzi, that sort of like talked about children must experience awe and wonder and curiosity every day.
But they do if we give them a chance.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's that contradiction of what its early childhood should be against what it is. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've come to a natural pause. It's hard to let you go, Jane, because I think this is opening up so many possibilities for us to explore further. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your publications, and for the amazing links for us to go and look into further. So it's really a great way to end the difficult dialogue strand for the Childhood and Society SIG. And our next session will be chaired by Dr. Abel Longo, and it will be on next Monday, the 26th, again on Zoom. So please do join us. And it will be with Nick Fryer, What's Theatre Got to Do with It? A performance, everyday life, and our futures. And that's again next Monday. So that will be our final one of the series for eco-pedagogies next week, until we will retire over the summer and gather our thoughts and go through all of our sessions, and look forward to having some fresh ideas for next year to move forward on and to develop our networks for the Childhood and Society SIG. So thank you, Jane. Thank you all the delegates today, and thank you everybody for your contributions. We look forward to seeing you again soon.